Let's talk some Fallen Angels, Black Power Armor, and Death Visions of Sanguinius, with an overview of the Death Company in 40k 10th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Blood Angels and Death Company once more, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of the boys in black, the tragic curse of the Blood Angels leading to some surprisingly effective weapons to carve a murderous hole in the enemy's ranks. In the video let's talk a little bit about the lore and miniatures of the Death Company, then go through their datasheets, their unique formation and other options for fielding them in game, and a few thoughts as to what's looking most interesting after the Codex update. In the lore, the Death Company are a unique formation to the Blood Angels, the chapter's dark secret in the twin flaws of their gene seed. Every Blood Angel to a greater or lesser extent is afflicted by the Red Thirst, that drive towards dark impulses and bloodthirsty violence, but if anything the Black Rage is more insidious and far more fatal, haunted by visions of their dying Primarch. A mighty Blood Angel Space Marine and veteran of many wars might either slowly or quickly descend into madness, unable to distinguish friend from foe, only knowing violence, and there's no known cure for the affliction and no hope, with only Chief Librarian Mephiston having shrugged off the Black Rage. Increasingly uncontrollable, the Death Company don the black armour, emblazoned with red crosses that symbolise the wounds of Sanguinius, and are corralled under the watchful eyes of the chapter's chaplains to a glorious end to their story, taking down as many of the Emperor's foes as they possibly can, sent into the most risky and perilous situations as elite shock troops. The sheer anger and rage of a crazed Astartes is something to behold, and there are few that can hold against their charges, lay about the foe with crazed relic weapons and chainswords, caring little for injury or self-preservation. Should a battle brother descend into madness too far before meeting his end, Astorath the Grim, the chief chaplain of the Death Company, has the sombre duty of executing battle brothers that are a danger to themselves and the chapter, and the reclusiarchs of the Blood Angels ensure that the memories and the deeds of the fallen are recounted and kept alive, remembering the noble battle brother that was and not the monster that they became. In 10th edition, Games Workshop redid the Death Company miniatures. Previously they'd been served by this long-standing and flexible kit on the left, lots of themed parts, and options to fill the unit as either a bolter arm squad, melee on foot, or on jump packs, though it seems that in 10th edition their choice was to replace that with an upgrade sprue to Primaris Space Marines, rather than doing a unique Death Company Primaris kit for some reason. As a result, the Death Company Battle Brothers tend to be a lot less blingy now, unless you use parts from the old kit, and have quite a lot fewer war gear options as a result, the main most relevant ones on the upgrade sprue being the double-handed Eviscerator chainsaw that you can see on the top right here, plus their Inferno pistol. Otherwise, to fill the Death Company Dreadnought, it's now essentially the Brutalis Dreadnought, but with a paint job and a few bits from the upgrade sprue. To be fair, I do think it looks really quite nice in Death Company colours. I was clearly the successor to the Furioso when it was released. I can't help but think that a few more themed parts wouldn't have hurt though. Finally, to lead the Death Company into battle, we've got their chaplains. The unique chaplains Astorath, the ominous headsman of the company, and Chaplains Lemartes were redone recently, coming out in the recent Blood Angels Army Set box set, and at time of recording are still to release. And otherwise for relevant miniatures, there's a jump pack Blood Angels Chaplain that fits in with the theme all very nicely, plus the new and flexible captain kit for the Blood Angels does have a Death Company head, and there are datasheets to represent him as well. In general, internet reactions seem to be that the chaplains were pretty well received, both quite nice resculpts compared with their previous miniatures. I have to agree though that the bulk of the Death Company release did feel a bit on the lazy side. I think people just wanted a custom crafted kit to represent one of the chapter's two main elite infantry options, and we only got the Sanguinary Guard. It certainly feels to me like it's something that they could certainly revisit in the future if they wanted to. I suspect at some stage down the line we'll get a proper Death Company Primaris kit, though given that this was the major range refresh for the Blood Angels, it could be quite a long way away. Finally, while we're on the subject of miniatures and launch boxes, I'd just like to quickly mention the channel's September giveaway, where it's the last 24 to 48 hours or so to enter that at time of recording. If you'd like to enter either via the channel's Patreon page or Facebook page, I'll cycle back to this at the end of the video, but basically it's for 8 channel viewers to win one of these 4 box sets, and they'll be able to choose their favourite between the Blood Angels launch box with all the Death Company, Lemartes and Astorath, or one of the 3 inquisitorial ones for the Imperial Agents. Getting into rules in Codex Blood Angels for 10th edition though, let's go through the Death Company datasheets first. As mentioned, with removal of the Death Company plastic kit, that changed the gear on the standard Death Company Marines quite a bit, most notably not being able to be fielded with things like mass Thunderhammers or mass Power Fist and Inferno pistols. Standard Death Company Marines basically have the stat line of a normal Assault Intercessor with Objective Control 1, and the Black Rage has some fairly standard rules that applies to a bunch of datasheets. They get a 6+ feel no pain, which makes them unusually tough against things like damage 1 and particularly damage 2 attacks, where there's a good chance that you pass one of those saves out of the 2 and it doesn't neatly kill a Space Marine. They get to reroll all hits in melee, which is very nice for reliable accuracy, and the Blood Angels have got plenty of ways to make wound rolls a bit better, though it does come with a rather big downside that if Chaplains aren't within 12 inches of them, they're unable to fall back and get OC 0. Both of those are potentially really quite big things. If you can't fall back occasionally, that might ruin some shooting for the rest of your army, presuming you have some, and keep an enemy unit safe for a turn, or maybe mean that a Last Death Company miniature won't be able to fall back and will just die a slightly pointless death in close combat against something that they wouldn't have any chance against, and they may as well have fallen back and had something else try and deal with the threat. It means they're a fair bit more powerful than things like standard assault intercessors, but are kind of hard to control and don't do objectives and things quite as well, which is sort of what you'd expect. In any case, beyond that, in the unit they're equipped with Astartes Chainswords, 4 attacks at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1. They get 1 Eviscerator per 5 models, which is 3 attacks at strength 7, AP 2, damage 2, and sustained hits 1. Then sort of the sergeant equivalent in the unit can take a Power Fist or Thunderhammer, so that means that you get 2 more threatening melee weapons in a squad of 5, or 3 in a squad of 10. Their special rule gets them sustained hits 1 if the squad's depleted, or sustained hits 2 if they're below half strength. And that means that they perhaps just double down on things like the actual Death Company detachment rule, where potentially a depleted squad could have rerolled hits, reroll wounds, and also sustained hits too, so you would have massive amounts of damage for a last model or so in combat. Strength of these guys will depend on points, and Games Workshop certainly could change those a few times over the edition. The question for more optimised lists though might be whether or not these guys are really better than Assault Intercessors, given a lot more objective control, getting full rerolls against things on objectives, and also often pairing with Captains with their free stratagems and punchy melee, which might be a little bit preferred to Chaplains. Otherwise, their counterpart are the Death Company Marines with bolt rifles, a bit more range focused, and they get the intercessor options like the grenade launcher, otherwise kind of a similar unit, though it does mean that the either 3 or 7 remaining Marines will only be attacking with close combat weapons, so 3 attacks at strength 4 AP 0 rather than 4 at strength 4 AP 1. They don't get sustained hits, but they do get a once per turn free Overwatch or Heroic Intervention, and get to reroll the hit rolls when they're overwatching or charge rolls when heroic intervening, so they're really quite reliable when they do so. I guess the Overwatch is nice enough, but most of the time it might just add up to a few bolt hits and maybe a single grenade hit if you're lucky. I think it is a little bit unlikely to amount to absolutely loads of damage. To me they generally seem usable, but I feel like they're going to be unlikely to be priced at a points cost where they're massively exciting, or at least against things that are a bit more dedicated to any one battlefield role. Out of the core Death Company infantry datasheets, I feel like the Death Company with jump packs are perhaps one of the most interesting ones. Moving at 12 inches and having access to advance and charge in any of the Blood Angels detachments means they've got a massive threat range, plus they could deep strike and potentially get to where they need to be via rapid ingress if it made sense, drop them behind terrain and then charge the next turn. These guys also have a datasheet quirk where they get more Power Fists for some reason as well. I'm not really too sure as to the logic of that, but basically you could have a Power Fist on the Sergeant, and then both a Power Fist and an Eviscerator within the squad of 5, and another 2 if you build out to 10, so you could have half the squad with a big threatening damage 2 melee weapon. They're still not going to be quite as absolutely destroy everything as the Power Fist Jump Death Company were in the Index, where you could have entire squads of Power Fists, but I feel like they've still got enough fancy weapons to make them well worth it. They'll be very good at destroying elite infantry, and capable of punching up against tough stuff, either just through weight of attacks, or ideally if they can get some sort of strength, lethal hits, or +1 to wound buff, which they can get from all sorts of sources. Next up, we've got the Death Company Dreadnought, this one now having the Brutalis profile, 10 wounds at toughness 12, and an 8-inch move to get it towards the enemy as fast as possible. Likely some multi-melters and that Icarus stubber on top, and for this one, given that it gives you 4 rerolls to hit in melee, I'd be far more tempted to take the pictured talons as opposed to the fists, as that one gives you a sweep mode that could be great against hordes. For its average damage output, with the 4 rerolls to hit, you'll often have a good chance of one-rounding an enemy battle tank, particularly if you take into account multi-melter shooting. It averages around about 10 wounds to a toughness 10 vehicle, or 8 wounds to a toughness 12 one, and still does well against hordes and terminators. Basically anything that he catches in melee is going to feel it quite hard. His special rule is also really quite a nasty one as well. Driven by Fury means that he gets essentially a surge move that can move him towards melee. So if you have him standing on a mid-board objective, then the opponent can't just move up to take the objective and then also shoot him, unless they're happy for that squad in the mid-board to be in combat with this Dreadnought, which a lot of things probably don't want to be. A 6+ Feel No Pain is also a 20% durability boost compared with the Brutalis 2, and that definitely adds a bit more value, even if he's going to be shakier on objectives. Moving on, we've got the Death Company characters, and starting off with Astorath the Grim himself. He was a bit of a niche pick pre-Codex, but got massively tuned up in the 10th edition book. He went up to 6 attacks at Strength 7, AP 3 and Damage 2, or with both devastating wounds and precision. That's going to be really scary to basically anything that's toughness 6 or less, and does seem like it's enough attacks to be meaningful at a good chance to one-shot a character. He joins Jump Death Company, and he gives them devastating wounds on the charge, and also a 4+ chance to fight on death, which can be quite big against melee armies if you charge in, destroy something, and then you get countercharged in turn. Means they can be dragging down a lot of enemy as they go. I guess we'll see whether or not his devastating wound boost and his damage profile boost come with a points increase. Next up, we've got Lemartes, certainly an absolutely massive staple character in pre-Codex Blood Angels armies, 120 points for the Chaplain that's fallen to the Black Rage. He's also fairly fighty with the Blood Crozius, which has got 5 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2, Damage 2, and lethal hits. He gives lethal hits to his Death Company, which will be more important than ever given that a few more of them will be hitting with lower strength profiles now. And also has a very nice -1 damage buff for them, which is particularly nice against Damage 2 or Damage 3 attacks hitting the Death Company Marines. It's been near enough halving the damage for Damage 2, and meaning that you could easily survive a Damage 3 shot if you can pass one Feel No Pain roll. Unless they put his points cost incredibly high, I suspect it will remain a staple. Finally, for the Death Company support characters, we've got the Chaplains from Core Codex Space Marines. There's either the Fancy Blood Angels one with the jump pack or the on-foot version. These have both been really popular units as well, really quite cheap and effective to give the squad +1 to wound and guarantee that you're warding off the negative effects of the Black Rage. Again, as well as having a fair bit of damage of their own right. The jump one starts the fight phase with some mortal wounds and also can take a power fist as well, which is pretty big. So certainly chips into damage output in his own right, perhaps even more important against harder targets given that a good chunk of the 10-man Death Company with jump packs will have chainswords. Lastly, for the Death Company characters, we've got the Captains. Both of these were new datasheets for the Codex and sort of feel like the spiritual successor to Death Company Tycho for the on-foot one. He can take only the war gear that's present in the Blood Angels Captain box, and interestingly could be a way to make foot Death Company a little bit more scary, given that you can scout them towards the enemy. If he's slain in melee as well, you have a chance to deal some mortal wound damage, getting it improved if it's the enemy warlord in the enemy unit, though I wouldn't say it's enough mortal wound damage to really make it a good idea to try and get him martyred in close combat. I think scouting Death Company is interesting enough in theory, though plenty of armies could screen them out a bit. I just think he is going to be a tough sell versus the Chaplains though, given that he doesn't counteract the effects of the Black Rage, so you'd either have to coordinate with other squads with Chaplains, or have your squad be objective control 0, which isn't the best when you're scrapping over midfield objectives. Finally, we've got the version of him with the jump pack too. His listed points in the Codex were 100 points, but likely won't be the final ones. He doesn't get the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield option that the core Codex gets, but instead has 5 attacks with a Power Fist at Strength 8, AP 2 and Damage 2. His buff is to give his unit sustained hits 1 in melee for his lead unit, plus having that same Death Vision special rule for mortal wounds when he dies, and again, to be honest, I can't really see him being a particularly good choice to take versus a Chaplain in the same unit. The +1 to wound boost and not being OC 0 are just kind of massive. I feel like compared with the Chaplains, the only big selling point of these are they can take the enhancements in the unique Death Company detachment. Speaking of which, that one in the Blood Angels Codex is named the Lost Brethren. I feel like there was always going to be a Blood Angels Death Company detachment in that particular book, and I feel like the rules in it are interesting, though I must admit I think they made them a bit overly restricted power-wise. I can't really see this one out-competing the other options elsewhere in the Codex, particularly compared with the Liberator Assault Group. It does just seem kind of curious that this detachment doesn't seem to give the Death Company quite as much as that one does, despite this one being the far more restrictive one, where it's basically Death Company gets support and nothing else does. Just generally in 40k, if you've got a more restricted detachment that only focuses on just a few key units, the buffs it provides needs to be kind of strong to outweigh not focusing as much on other options. For the detachment's core rule, Death Company Marines and Death Company Marines with bolt rifles gain the battle line keyword, so you could field loads of them if desired, or very fun and fluffy there. If they're cheap enough, I can't help but think it would be kind of fun just to try and field a Death Company Horde style detachment and just see how many Space Marines that the enemy can handle with Feel No Pain and loads of damage in close combat. In general though, I can't really see too many people wanting to take over 3 units of both of them. If anything, I would have guessed that the jump pack ones might have been the ones that people wanted to spam, but they don't get it. The core rule is one of the ones where you take damage and you get a damage boost. For Death Company units that are below starting strength, you get to reroll wound rolls of 1 in melee, and then if they're below half strength, you get to fully reroll wound rolls. It's just a bit disappointing that the damage buff just isn't anywhere near as good as the Liberator one. Rerolling wound rolls isn't nothing, but it's not all that great, and it doesn't even affect the Death Company Dreadnought's melee at all. Being able to fully reroll wound rolls is genuinely very good, but you're not going to be able to control which units your opponent puts down to below half health, and if they know that you've got this, then they'll probably be aiming to just try and wipe things out, which doesn't usually tend to be the hardest thing to do in 40k. Quite a lot of the time you can focus fire. It is definitely worth something, but I feel like to compete directly with Liberator, perhaps you need to also give them something like the +1 attack on the charge that one gets, and maybe make it something like a partial trade-off rather than a full trade-off for that rule. Otherwise, to rattle through the stratagems quickly, there's Armour of Contempt, generally handy for Death Company given that they don't have invulnerable saves, really good for the Dreadnought. Lost to Rage is quite a good damage dealer, +1 attack, strength and AP, though the unit has to be below starting strength once more. Kind of annoying that it's such a genuinely great damage boost, but you're going to be a bit limited as to when you can use it. It does make me think that the standard Death Company Marines on foot would be in absolute rage mode with this and the detachment buffs on the go, particularly if you only had a few of them left. Final Retribution gives you a 4+ chance to fight on death if you haven't already, with a +1 to the roll if there's a chaplain nearby. That is nice to have against melee armies, you'll be able to have it pop up where necessary. Glorious Sacrifice is a sticky objectives on death rule. If a unit's slain on an objective, it remains yours. Situationally again, that can be really good. I feel like there's going to be a fair few times where you have Death Company kill something on an objective and then get shot down in return. Furious Onslaught gives you a pile-in move of d3 plus 3 inches or 6 inches if within range of a chaplain. I feel like it might have been a bit more useful if it had been consolidates as well, but I guess should be a boost to help get everyone into melee where you need it, or maybe occasionally do some positioning shenanigans and drag unexpected units into melee. And then finally they've got Wrathful Rampage, Advance and Charge, and they can also shoot as well as they go in if there's a chaplain nearby. For most of these buffs, I'd usually assume that there will be a chaplain nearby. You'd have to have a fair few of them if you're really building heavily around the Death Company. For reliable value, I'd say that this one is probably the single best. It just means that every unit on the board is going to have a far greater threat range, so it's more reliably going to be making charges rather than falling short and sat out in the open, at least for one key unit each turn. Perhaps the biggest negative of that one, though, is that both of the other detachments get it, even if the Angelic Host is locked only to jump packs, though I guess this one's restrictive in its own way given that it's Death Company only. For the enhancements, these are Death Company only, so basically only the captains. I do kind of wonder why they didn't give the chaplains the option to take these as well. Feels like that probably would have made sense given that they're the ones that are often going to be leading them into battle. In any case, I'd say they're mostly usable-ish, though probably a bit more point filler as opposed to something that you go out to plan your army around. Sanguinius' Grace allows you a second fight activation in a phase if there's 3 or more models in engagement range at the end of the phase. I guess something like another 5 attacks or so with a Power Fist against a Horde type unit. Not nothing, but maybe a little bit questionable. Sometimes you just won't even be able to activate it, certainly against some armies that have individual big tough models or infantry units that aren't going to survive a round in combat against Death Company. The Blood Shard is 25 points, a 2+ chance to revive in death at the end of the phase with a 3 wound remaining. I guess that could be far enough for an aggressive captain if captains wind up being cheap enough. If it is 25 points though, I still feel like that's a lot, mainly just because it's something that will only take effect if your model actually dies. Though I suppose could be okay for a unit that you're planning to throw into melee very early. To slay the War Master is 15 points. This one gives you a bunch of mortal wounds once per battle against an enemy character unit. It does damage basically the same equivalent as the grenade attack. You might spike high and wipe out a character in one hit. I suppose that could be kind of fun. If you paired it with Epic Challenge, could make something like a captain into a really fighty assassin type character. Finally, for 10 points, we've got Vengeful Onslaught. If the bearer is destroyed until the end of your next turn, all Death Company get +1 to hit on the board. I feel like if this does remain 10 points, this one's probably the best of them, just because in this detachment you're going to be using lots of Death Company. Though given that they reroll all hits in melee anyway, it only adds up to a +9% damage boost, but even that's definitely not nothing when it's applied to an entire army at once. Seems great value if you weren't planning to include anything else. Overall, my initial impressions are that this one's not going to get used too much in tournament play, unfortunately. More of a fun and fluffy one if you want to just put mass Death Company on the table and have the best rules to represent them with their lore. There is a lot of good stuff for gloriously sacrificing yourself for the chapter. They definitely have some nice support stratagems, and advance and charge is good. I think that just the disappointing bit overall is that so much of it feels very situational, a bit reactive to what your opponent's doing, maybe partly due to the theming and lore of models sacrificing themselves, and there's really not all that much that can just add reliable value to your Death Company jumping forward and breaking things in the same way as Liberator. Due to that, if you just wanted Death Company that's fun and hit things very, very hard in close combat, I do think that Liberator is probably going to give you better value with that. Red Thirst is the core rule, +2 to your strength on the charge and +1 attack on the charge. Everything Death Company can absolutely use that. Any hidden power fists within units get up to strength 10, which is a really big breakpoint, and chainsaws go from strength 4 to strength 6, and again that's absolutely massive, wounding things like toughness 3 things on 2s, and wounding Terminators on 3s, maybe even wounding them on 2s if you've got a Chaplain along. Otherwise, they've got some good stratagems, a 1 command point for Red Rampage for lance and lethal hits. It's either one or the other, or both if you take Battle Shock. It's great on basically everything, though maybe could be particularly nice with an isolated Jump Death Company unit just used for damage only. If you're already Objective Control 0, most of the time you don't really care too much about taking Battle Shock, so could happily double dip for no ill effect. Otherwise, they also get advance and charge for 1 command point, and also have access to fallback and charge. They've got an enhancement that allows fights first once per game, which could be great on a Chaplain along with a Death Company unit. Jump in, destroy an enemy squad, and then if the enemy dares to charge you, then you're going to hit them really hard instead. Not so big against shooting armies, but massive against melee stuff. And probably the best thing is that it means that you don't have to go absolutely pure Death Company if you don't want to, as all the good stuff works on other units as well, which isn't true for the Death Company detachment. As you can tell, this is the one I'd be far more tempted for actual in-game power, as opposed to a more fun and fluffy game, and the Angelic Host is a fun one as well with all its redeploys. There feels quite a lot more general Blood Angels jump packs as opposed to Death Company focused. Overall for Death Company at the moment, Blood Angels are kind of in that slightly awkward time, where their Codex has had all of its rules revealed, but they don't yet have official points for them, and of course the strength of any one unit is absolutely going to depend on those points costs when they're out. I think the thing is, for potential to be strong though, I'd really put most money on the Jump Pack Death Company. They both move fast so can make melee, and have plenty of damage 2 weapons in the unit, and I've got plenty of options that could buff them really well, particularly the Jump Pack Chaplains, both the named ones and the regular one. Pre-Codex they were generally used as the Blood Angels big investment sort of glass hammer type unit, or as much as you can apply that to Space Marines in any case, hitting spectacularly hard, but for their points cost being really quite fragile, and only a bit less so if Lemartes is there to take the edge off. They generally need to play cagey with terrain, jumping from piece to piece, and then only throwing themselves into glorious combat when there's something that's actually worthy of them, not just throwing themselves in and absolutely massively overkilling some depressing screening unit, and then having the rest of the army just shoot them to death. Otherwise, for the buffing units, I feel like Lemartes and regular Chaplains look like the most obviously good ones, counteracting the Black Rage and giving you nice damage boost, and in Lemartes' case a defensive buff. I feel like Astorath seems usable enough as well, though it might depend a bit as to how much his points go up if they do. I feel like with the stat line boost that he had, he'll be lucky to be 85 points, though I feel if they put him too much up, he's still going to be kind of behind Lemartes and the regular Chaplains. Both of his boosts are nice enough though, but just a bit less directly reliable and always useful as Lemartes ones are. Otherwise, maybe for units looking at a little bit more mid-tier points depending, I feel like the melee Death Company Marines still seem interesting, though I feel like they'll be competing hard with just things like standard assault intercessors plus captains. I just feel like now they don't have quite as many big scary melee weapons. People might be tempted by cheap and effective high objective control assault intercessors, plus a very very fighty captain who can activate rage mode once per game, potentially with full wound rerolls against objectives. They definitely still seem pretty usable though. For the Death Company Dreadnought, currently the Brutalis does get played in competitive lists from time to time, though usually seems to be very all or nothing. Very nasty if it makes melee and can actually get its damage into something genuinely useful, far less so if it's screened and ignored for a turn or two, maybe charges a cheap screening unit and then gets focused down. Hopefully it's efficient for damage and defense for its points cost though. It does get the feel no pain and reroll hits in melee versus the regular ones, that does also come with the downside of low objective control if you're not near Chaplains. That reactive move does seem kind of great though for skirmishing on mid-board objectives. Means that if the opponent's trying to push up and do objective shenanigan things, They might just not be able to afford to ping random anti-tank shots into it for fear of it just striding into close combat and hitting something very hard. Finally, my initial guess for things that will be less strong are the Death Company Captains. I just think that they'll need to be far cheaper than Games Workshop is likely to cost them to get the nod over the Chaplains that help you with your objective control and the other boosts. I'm not sure that bearing enhancements in the Death Company Detachment is quite enough to change that. The Death Company on foot with bolters as well, again I think would have to be very cheap for them to overcome units that have a bit more of a dedicated role. Again, they just don't really strike me as the sort of thing that you'd usually want to invest a whole chaplain to keep them in line, particularly as the ones where they hit least hard in melee. Though to be fair, if they're cheap, they do have some genuine range and melee threat, and the free Overwatch isn't nothing either. They maybe feel like the sort of unit that you could absolutely make work if you wanted to, though I feel like not many people will. In any case though, it's going to be interesting to see what sort of army list people come up with, and how much Death Company feature in Blood Angels lists once we get the 4 points and everything. In any case though, let me know your thoughts and impressions of the Death Company and Codex Blood Angels. Look forward to hearing all your ideas down in the comments. As mentioned earlier, if you wanted to have one way to get a whole bunch of Death Company and a Blood Angels army, I'll just mention the channel giveaway for September. 8 channel winners going to be getting either a Blood Angels army set or one of the Inquisitorial Ordo battle forces, your choice which. As ever with the channel giveaways, there's 2 equal ways to enter, both of them links down in the video description. Either you can support the channel on Patreon for any amount. It is the main thing that allows me to keep these videos coming quite so regularly, and that gets you automatic entry into the giveaways each and every month. Otherwise, you can support the channel via social media completely for free and enter via boosting the algorithms. To do that, you simply do 3 actions: subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the Auspex Tactics Facebook page, and then for the actual giveaway entry, a post appears on the 1st of September and responds to that post with a photo of any 40k mini or imagery, along with your name and the date handwritten within the same photo to ward off Facebook bots and spammers. The post is active for 24 hours, and after that I do the draw, putting all the entries into the random number generator and announcing the winners on the channel update video that appears on or around the 4th of the month. I'll announce them then, including the contents of the next giveaway for November, and the models will be posted after I've received my orders of them. In any case, feel free to check out the channel's Patreon page or the Facebook page. They're both links down in the video description if you're interested. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts as to the Death Company. What do you make of their new models and their new rules? Let me know down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, if you would like to help support the channel and enter the giveaways and things. Channel patrons get a few other advantages as well, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, automatic entry into those giveaways, and a few other bits like names in the credits and Discord roles and things. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.